Hi, I'm Professor Sunil Maheshwari, Professor of Accounting at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Today we will be talking about process costing. This is one of the methods to approximate the cost for a process. We have probably done job costing earlier, and one of the things which we'll do today is see the differences between job order and the process order costing system. That is, how is this system, process order costing system, used to compute compute the cost of a cost object. We'll also go into the flow of cost in the process cost system. One of the things which is different about the process costing is the computation of equivalent units. We'll do one or two examples of computing the equivalent units so everyone understands how those units are computed. Once that is done, I'll lay out the four basic steps in preparing the production cost report. What is production cost report? That basically is accumulation of the cost of that particular process for that period. And once the production cost report is prepared, to prepare the production cost report, we will be using the weighted average method. We are not covering the FIFO method at this time. Now, process costing is used when you prepare similar products and which are produced in mass quantity in a continuous fashion. For example, you might be preparing manufacturing Coca-Cola or any of the cola. There are different processes that gets into preparing that. First is blending, then filling, and then packaging. So there are two or three different processes over here, and the costs are being incurred in each of these processes. In the process order costing, as opposed to the job order costing, we accumulate the cost for each process and not a job. Here are some examples where you can use process order costing and where job order costing can be used. As you know, that job order costing is useful when it is a customized product. Say if you're making motion pictures. So Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, whenever they make a movie, then the cost of that movie needs to be accumulated. And that is the cost of that product, of that project for Walt Disney or Warner Brothers. Similarly, at Mayo Clinic, patient health care is a personalized area, and Mayo Clinic will have to collect the cost that has been incurred for the patient for separately, and it will be very different from the second or third or fourth patient. As opposed to that, if you are a soft drink manufacturer like Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, if you have got a 2-liter bottle, then it is a 2-liter bottle, and it is the cost of each of that bottle is similar, and it goes through a similar process. Similarly, if you are a company like Intel, which makes computer chips, a particular computer chip will be very similar to other computer chips of the same at the same level. Similarly, when you do the chemicals, you can use the process order costing system because those chemicals are very similar. One unit of chemical is similar to the other unit of chemical that is being produced at that time. So as we mentioned, there are certain differences between the two. In a job order costing, you accumulate the cost in each job. That is, your direct material, direct labor, and allocated manufacturing overheads are accumulated to find the cost of the job, because that job has some unique characteristics. As opposed to that, in a process cost is used when there are a series of connected manufacturing processes or departments, and the products are uniform and homogeneously produced and are in large volumes. To look at the flow of cost in the two cost systems, we accumulated the cost of direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead in the job, each of the jobs. So job 101 will have all the three elements, 102 will have the three elements. Once the jobs are finished, they go to the finished goods inventory. And when the goods are finished and then sold, the cost moves to the cost of goods sold in the income statement. In the process costing system, the costs are similar: direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, where direct labor and manufacturing overheads together is called the conversion cost, because those costs are used to convert the direct material into the finished goods. So since there are distinct processes or departments, until the goods are finished, it remains in work in process, but you might have multiple work in process accounts: work in process for process A, work in process for process number 2 in department B, and so on. Once the processes are finished and goods are completed, it moves to the finished goods inventory. From the finished goods inventory, when it is sold, it goes to the cost of goods sold. So to understand some more differences, in the document which we use in the job order costing system is called the job cost sheet. In process order costing, it's called the production cost report. The manufacturing overheads are determined for each job under the job order costing system, whereas for the process order costing system, it is for each period and each process. As far as the unit cost computation is concerned, it is slightly different, where as in the job order costing, you take the accumulated cost of each job and divide by the units produced for the job. In the process order costing system, you take the total manufacturing cost, but you divide it by the equivalent units produced during the period. We will be discussing in detail what equivalent units means, how the journal entries will flow along with the physical flow of goods in a process order costing. So once the manufacturing costs are assigned, they're debited. Once the costs are incurred, it moves to the work in process debit side for the first process. Once the first process is completed, it moves to the second process, and that is debited. And then when the work is completed, the work in process for the assembly department is credited, and the finished goods inventory is debited. And when the goods are sold, it is debited to cost of goods sold and credited to the cost of to the finished goods inventory. Now before we get into the steps of making the production cost report, we will talk about the concept of equivalent units. Let's take the university situation. Suppose your college president asks you to compute the cost instruction per full-time equivalent student. Obviously, you cannot teach to a half a student. So here is some of the data. Total cost of instruction is, say, $9 million. You have been given the information that the full-time students are 900 and the part-time are 1,000. Now, in addition to that, the information that is given to you is that part-time students take 60% of the classes of a full-time student during the year. So if a full-time student takes 10 classes, part-time student is taking 6 classes. Now, to compute the full-time equivalent students, you've got full-time 900 students, that is, they are full-time students and they are going to school full-time. However, as far as the part-time students are concerned, since they're taking 60% of the classes and they are 1,000 of the part-time students, we multiply 1,000 by 60% to give 600 students, equivalent students, and that will give you 1,500 full-time equivalent students. And to compute the cost per full-time equivalent student, you take 9 million and divide by 1,500 to get the cost of $6,000. So in this case, we converted the part-time student to full-time equivalent so that we can get the cost of per student in terms of equivalent students. One of the common method which is used to compute the cost and the process costing is weighted average method. And in the weighted average method, beginning work in process does not become part of computation of equivalent units. In FIFO it does, but for the weighted average it does not. So the method which we are going to cover today is weighted average, in which the beginning work in process is not part of the computation of equivalent units, but the cost incurred are. In this case, your units completed and transferred out, plus any equivalent units of ending work in process gives you the equivalent units of production. So now we will focus our attention on how to compute these equivalent units of production. Let's assume that Corey Company Packaging Department consists of 10,000 units which have been completed and transferred out. So you've got 10,000 units which are completed and transferred out. So the physical units are 10,000. Since all the units are complete, your equivalent units are also 10,000. Let's look at the second part. 5,000 units in the ending process are 70% complete. So as far as those 5,000 units are concerned, we will consider them equivalent of 3,500 full completed units. We took 5,000, multiplied it by 70%, and that gives us 3,500. 10,000 units were already completed, giving you total equivalent units of 13,500. Now we can apply this to, say, a situation on Eggo Waffle, where there are 3 departments: mixing, baking, and freezing. And mixing department combines dry ingredients, flour, and so on, and to make the waffle. So the additional information that is given on the mixing department is as follows. You've got the beginning work in process in the mixing department of 100,000 physical units, that is 100,000 units were there. And then you started the production of, say, 800,000 more waffles, or total units we have to account for is 900,000 units. Generally speaking, it says that it is complete with respect to materials for the beginning inventory, that's 100%. And conversion cost, which is basically labor and the manufacturing overhead, is 70% complete with respect to the work in process. But remember, when we are doing the weighted average, we do not worry about the equivalent units in the work in process, beginning inventory. So please note, out of the 900,000 units, 200,000 units are still not complete, and so therefore cannot be moved to the next department, but 700,000 units are complete in all respect. So as far as those 700,000 units are concerned, it is 100% complete, and physical units and equivalent units will be same. However, for the ending inventory, since the raw materials is added at the beginning of the process for Eggo waffles, they are complete with respect to raw materials. So 200,000 physical units are there, and 200,000 equivalent units will be there. However, with respect to the conversion cost, since these units are not complete, only 60% of these units are complete, we will need to compute the equivalent units for the conversion cost. If you take the equivalent units, which is 200,000 times 60%, gives you 120,000 units for the conversion cost. Now, to begin with, you had 700,000 units which were fully complete, that is, all the costs relating to materials and the conversion cost, which is labor and manufacturing overheads, were added at the beginning of the process. So the physical units and equivalent units are same. When we look at the ending work in process, the raw material has been added to all the units. So 200,000 times 100% gives you 200,000 units of equivalent units of material. So you've got total 900,000 of material units of equivalent units of material. And for equivalent units of conversion cost, you've got 820,000. So to get to the equivalent units, what do we have? We have units completed and transferred out material is plus equivalent units of ending work in process for materials gives you the equivalent units of materials. You do the same thing for the conversion cost. You've got the units completed and transferred out, plus you add the equivalent units of ending work in process for the conversion cost. That will give you the equivalent units of conversion cost. Now let's do this problem. Here is a mixing department which consists of 20,000 units completed and transferred out. So as far as those 20,000 units are concerned, they are complete and transferred out. So in that case, your physical units and equivalent units are same. 5,000 units are ending work in process, which are 60% complete. So as far as 60% of 5,000 is concerned, it is 300. So your total equivalent units of production will become 20,000 plus 3,000, giving you 23,000. Now we have got all the basics together for preparing a production cost report. Now, the step number 1 is computation of physical unit. Second step is to compute the equivalent unit of production. Third step is to compute the unit production cost. Once you have got the equivalent unit, then you can compute the unit production cost. And then step number 4 is to prepare a reconciliation schedule. So we had certain costs to account for in the beginning. We have certain number of units to account for in the beginning. And at the end, those units need to be accounted for, and those costs will be accounted for through the ending inventory or the units which have been completed and transferred out. Now we'll go through each step. To give the background for the example that we are going to do, here is the cost flow for making an Eggo waffle. You've got the raw materials, factory labor, manufacturing overhead at each of the processes. The process and sequence is mixing department. From the mixing department, the material goes to the baking department. From the baking department, it goes to the freezing and packaging department. And once everything is done, it is part of your finished goods Eggo waffles. What we are going to do is we will prepare a production cost report for each of the departments: mixing department, baking department, and freezing department. Today, I will only go through one department, that is the mixing department. The process of preparing the production cost report for baking department and freezing department, or for that matter, any other process, is similar. So to go through the process, I'll give you, we will start with the computation of physical units. Those are the units those are actual units that you need to account for, regardless of the work performed during that period. So what are the units that you account for? That is generally beginning inventory plus units that are transferred out or started during the production. So beginning inventory plus units started in production during the period or transferred in from the previous process. So your beginning inventory plus transferred in is the total units you have to account for. Here is some basic data about the waffle Eggo for making the Eggo. You've got the beginning inventory, which is direct materials, 100% complete, conversion cost 70% complete for 100,000 units. Then units that you started during the period is 800,000. So those 900,000 units are the units that you need to account for. out of which 200,000 were completed and 700,000 were completed and transferred out to the next process, that is the baking. Then we have got the costs which have been incurred. Your total cost that was incurred up till now in the beginning inventory is 85,000, and the total cost incurred during the production in the month of June is 400 plus 170, 570,000. So the total cost which we need to account for is 570 plus 85,000. Now, although we do not take into account the equivalent units of material from the beginning inventory, but we do take into account the cost that has been incurred to make those units. I think we have gone over this earlier. You have got beginning inventory plus units transferred out, that is 100 plus 800 gives you 900. And that has been accounted for by 700 unit that has been transferred out and 200,000 in the ending inventory. So this second step is to compute the equivalent units. As far as the unit 700,000 units that are transferred out, they are complete with respect to materials and with respect to the conversion costs. So the number of physical units and the equivalent units are same, which is 700,000. Now coming to the work in process at the end of the period. As far as direct materials are concerned, for all the 200,000 units, the direct materials was added at the beginning of the process. So equivalent units are 200,000 and for the material. And for the conversion cost, 60% of 200,000, because those units are complete to the extent of 60% only. So 60% of 200,000 gives you 120,000. So total equivalent units of raw material is 900,000. Now we will go to step number 3, where we will compute the unit production cost for the equivalent units. We'll do the equivalent cost for materials and the conversion cost as well to give you the total manufacturing cost. Let's assume that direct material cost was 550,000 from the beginning inventory. Cost added during the period was 400,000. 450,000 is the total cost that we need to account for. We computed in step 2 that number of equivalent units of raw materials was 900,000. So 450,000 divided by the number of units, which is 900,000, gives you a unit cost of 50 cents. Keep that number in mind, which will come in handy when we allocate the cost finally to the finished goods and ending inventory. Similarly, for the conversion cost, the beginning inventory, if you look at the beginning inventory number, you have got the conversion cost of 35,000, and then you added during this period 170,000 more, total cost of 205,000. What we computed in terms of equivalent unit in step 2 was 820,000 units. The total conversion cost of 205,000 divided by 820,000 gives you a conversion cost, unit conversion cost of 25 cents. So for direct material, we had a unit cost of 50 cents, and unit conversion cost for conversion cost is 25 cents. Once you have got those two numbers together, then the cost of each unit for manufacturing each unit is 75 cents, 50 cents for the unit material cost, and then 25 cents for the unit conversion cost. So once you add those together, you've got the total manufacturing cost at 75 cents. Next, we will prepare a reconciliation schedule. That is, we started with certain units and certain cost. In the beginning inventory, we had a cost of 85,000, and during the month of June, we had the production costs that were incurred were 570,000. The total cost we need to account for is therefore 655,000 among the units which are in the ending inventory and the units which have been completed, which was 700,000 units that were completed. In terms of 700,000, since those units are completed and your cost per unit is 75 cents, so 700,000 times 75 cents gives you $525,000 of cost for the units completed. Now the remaining units which were incomplete were those 200,000 units, but the 200,000 units were complete with respect to material. Cost per unit, equivalent unit of material was 50 cents. So as far as the material is concerned, your material cost is 50 cents times 200,000 to give you a cost of 100,000. For the conversion cost, your cost per unit was 25 cents. From step number 2, where we computed the equivalent units in the ending inventory of 120,000, your conversion cost is 120,000 times 25 cents to give you 30,000. So the total cost is 130,000 for the valuation of work in process ending inventory. So we started with total cost of 655,000. That was what we needed to account for, and now we have accounted for that 655,000 by allocating the cost to the units that have been completed, and then units that have not been completed and are in work in process. And that is what is the reconciliation part. Now, this slide basically puts all the 4 steps together. If you look at column number 2, where it puts the step number 1, which is accounting for the physical units, 800 plus 100 gives you 900. 900 is divided into 700 and 200. Then step number 2, to find the equivalent units, we already found the equivalent units of raw materials at 900 and conversion cost at 820,000. As then we found the step 3, where we found the per unit cost of material at 50 cents and then per unit of conversion cost at 25 cents. Once we did that, we accounted for the cost by allocating it to the units that have been completed. That is step number 4. 700,000 times 75 cents gives you 525, and then we valued the ending inventory for those 200,000 units of equivalent units of raw material and 120,000 equivalent units of conversion cost at 25 cents each, giving you the total cost of 655. If you notice at the end of step 3, your total cost that needed to be accounted for was 655,000. If you notice at the end of step 4, once all the costs have been accounted for, that total is also 655,000. This overall, this is the summary of the various steps of in the process of costing. Thank you very much.